Nathan Brooks stood in front of the massive glass window of his penthouse, staring out at the New York City skyline at night. The lights from the towering buildings twinkled like a silent symphony, stretching from Manhattan to the horizon. But to him, they were just cold, soulless specks, like the life he was leading. His apartment spanned over 3,000 square feet, dressed in minimalist tones of icy gray and white. The only sound came from his leather shoes echoing across the polished wooden floor whenever he moved. His assistant, Mark, had already left after placing a glass of bourbon and the next day's schedule on the table, a packed lineup of tense meetings, glamorous charity galas, and handshakes so rehearsed that Nathan barely needed to glance at the itinerary. He took a sip of the bourbon. The burn slid down his throat, but it did nothing to thaw the chill in his soul. Setting the glass down, he stared into the distance and told himself everything was fine, just like always. He walked over to the tall mirror in the living room and faced himself. Tailored black suit hugging his lean frame, dark brown hair neatly combed, piercing blue eyes like polished steel, a successful 35-year-old CEO whom the media had dubbed Wall Street's new conqueror. But looking deeper into those eyes, Nathan saw a void he couldn't explain, a bottomless well where light never reached. He turned away, rubbed his face, and told himself it was just the schedule getting to him. Loneliness? He didn't have time for that. His life was numbers, deals, and late-night parties, no space for pointless questions. That evening, everything took an unexpected turn. His sleek black Lamborghini Aventador broke down on a quiet street in Brooklyn under a chilly fall drizzle. The engine went silent, and all he could hear was the steady tap of rain on the windshield, a reminder that even the most expensive machines can fail. He dialed Mark, but the signal kept dropping in the old neighborhood, and for the first time in years, Nathan felt out of control, a feeling he absolutely hated. He stepped out of the car. Rain soaked through his long coat, and his expensive leather shoes squelched on the wet sidewalk. Around him were a few worn brick houses, dim streetlights, and a small bookstore at the corner glowing with warm yellow light. Nathan didn't want to go in. A place like that wasn't part of his world. He was used to sleek Manhattan offices and five-star restaurants with absurdly priced menus, not old bookstores with faded wooden signs swinging in the wind. But the rain picked up, and the wind slipped through the seams of his coat. He had no choice. He pushed the door open. It creaked like a sound from the past. The scent of old paper and wood drifted toward him, so different from the expensive colognes he was used to in boardrooms. Inside, a young woman around 29 stood behind the counter. Her loosely tied blonde hair let a few natural curls fall forward, and her bright eyes watched him with open curiosity. She wore a light blue sweater, slightly frayed at the cuffs, and held a worn paperback in one hand. "Car trouble?" she asked, her voice soft, but lacking the usual flattery Nathan got from people around him. "Good guess," Nathan replied coolly, pulling out his phone to call for service. But the woman, her name, according to a small sign on the counter, was Emily Harper, just gave a half smile, warm and a little playful. "Phone won't work here. Signal's terrible in this part of town. You can use my landline, free of charge." Nathan glanced at her, slightly annoyed by her casual tone. He wasn't used to being treated like just another guy. People usually bowed, flattered, or at least showed some kind of awe. But he nodded anyway, stepped to the counter, and made his call while Emily went back to flipping through her book, seemingly uninterested. When he hung up, she looked up again, meeting his gaze without judgment. "Gonna be a while?" she said. "Take a seat. I don't kick customers out." "I don't need to sit," Nathan said stiffly, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat like he was trying to keep his distance. But her eyes, clear and honest, made him pause, as if she could see right through the armor he'd spent years building. Emily shrugged, then seemed to remember something. She reached for a book from the shelf and placed it in front of him. "If you've got time, read this. The Man Who Walked Through Loneliness. Seems like your kind of book." Nathan frowned, his tone edged with irritation. "My kind?" "Yeah," Emily said, arms crossed, eyes still on him. "Someone who has everything, but really doesn't. One look at you. Nice suit, fancy car, and a face like you just got out of a meeting with the entire world." Her voice wasn't mocking. It was matter of fact, like talking about the rain outside. He wanted to argue, to shut it down. But something about the way she said it, soft, without a hint of judgment, made him fall silent. He picked up the book, flipped through a few pages stiffly, then pulled some cash from his wallet and placed it on the counter. "I don't need advice." "Then just read," Emily said with a smile, sliding the money back toward him. "It's a gift. Consider it a thank you for making my shop a little less lonely tonight. Rainy night customers are rare." Her smile lit up under the warm yellow light, and for the first time in a long while, Nathan felt a strange flicker of warmth deep inside. He didn't say another word. When the car service arrived, he left, the sound of the Lamborghini's once powerful engine now silent under the falling rain. But all the way back to Manhattan, Emily's words kept echoing in his mind. Someone who has everything, but really doesn't. He told himself she was annoying. What would a part-time bookseller know about him? And yet, when he got back to his penthouse, instead of tossing the book aside like he did with things that didn't matter, Nathan sat down on the sofa, turned on the reading lamp, and opened it. The first page read, "Loneliness isn't about being alone. It's about not being seen." Nathan paused, his finger resting on the line, the words hitting something inside him. He looked around the room, spacious, flawless, and cold, like an empty museum. He thought of the warm yellow glow of the bookstore, of Emily's effortless smile. And for the first time in years, he felt a hollow space inside himself that he couldn't name. He wondered if he'd been missing something important, or if he had never truly lived at all. He kept reading. Page by page, line by line, the book unfolded like a door he never knew was there. The city outside stayed lit, horns blaring faintly in the distance. But this time, Nathan didn't glance out the window. He read through the night, until dawn crept pale through the curtains, casting a gray hue across the room. When he finally closed the book, he didn't get up. He just sat there, hand resting on the cover, eyes distant, his mind spinning with questions he didn't yet have answers to. For the first time, Nathan asked himself, "How have I been living?" And somewhere deep inside, he knew something had shifted. Because of a book, a girl, and a rainy night he never planned for. 3 days after that rainy night, Nathan found himself standing in front of the bookstore in Brooklyn again. Hands in his coat pockets, he hesitated, staring through the fogged-up window. He didn't know why he was there. He had piles of financial reports waiting, and a dinner party with major investors back in Manhattan. But somehow, his feet had carried him back to this old, worn-out street. He told himself he was just there to buy another book, a logical excuse to avoid admitting that Emily's words still lingered in his mind. Someone who has everything, but really doesn't. He took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The bell above chimed softly, and the familiar scent of old paper washed over him, bringing with it a strange feeling, like returning to a place he'd never truly left. Emily was behind the counter, wiping down a shelf with a worn white cloth. She looked up when she saw him. "You again?" she said lightly, a hint of teasing in her voice, her eyes lighting up like she'd just uncovered a secret. "Car trouble again? Or did New York run out of places for you? I thought someone like you would be too busy to wander into places like this." Nathan frowned, trying to maintain his usual cool demeanor, though there was a flicker of something unsettled in him that he couldn't quite name. "I need a new book," he said, hands buried deep in his coat pockets, eyes scanning the dusty shelves like he actually knew what he was looking for. Emily gave a soft chuckle, set the cloth down, and walked over to him with an ease that felt disarming. "Let me guess. You didn't finish the one I gave you. Or maybe you did, and just don't want to admit it?" He said nothing. He wasn't about to confess that he had read it, not just once, but twice. Every line in that book had struck a nerve, kept him up at night. Seeing his silence, Emily shrugged and reached for another book from a shelf. The cover had yellowed with age. "All right then, try this. Quiet Days. From the title alone, I can already tell it doesn't match your vibe. You look like someone who's always racing deadlines. But who knows? Might surprise you." Nathan took the book, flipped through a few pages stiffly, then set it on the counter. His eyes flicked to hers. "Are you always this blunt?" he asked, his tone tinged with irritation, but also a curiosity he couldn't quite hide. Emily crossed her arms, studying him with a steady gaze. Her eyes sparkled under the warm yellow light. "Only with people who don't know how to just be themselves. You seem like that kind. Wound up tight, no idea how to relax." This time, Nathan didn't argue. He pulled up an old wooden stool near the counter and sat down. Not because he was tired, but because he didn't want to leave just yet. He wanted to hear her talk a little more. Emily went back to wiping shelves, chatting as she moved, like he was an old friend, rather than a stranger in a suit. "My mom called yesterday, said she missed my coffee. She's in the hospital but keeps asking to come home just for that smell in the morning." Emily smiled softly. "I told her to wait. I'm going to open a little cafe right next door someday. That way she can drink my coffee every day and watch me run around like crazy." Nathan looked up, surprised by the simple tenderness in her voice. It was real in a way he rarely heard in his own world. "You want to open a cafe?" he asked, genuinely intrigued, his fingers tapping lightly on the book. Emily nodded, her hand pausing mid-wipe, eyes drifting as if picturing something lovely. "Yeah, just a small one. Enough for me to live on, enough to make Mom happy. I love the smell of coffee. It's soft, warm. I love seeing people smile when they take that first sip. That's all I want, nothing big." Nathan said nothing, just listened, letting her words settle into the silence between them. In his world, dreams came with dollar signs and high-rises scraping the clouds. But this girl, with her loosely tied hair, hands rough from cleaning, dreamed of coffee and her mother's smile. And for the first time, Nathan felt something lighten inside him. Like her story was a soft breeze cutting through the sterile chill of his penthouse, brushing away the suffocating weight he hadn't even realized he carried. In the days that followed, he found himself returning to the bookstore more often, each time armed with a flimsy excuse that even he found laughable. "I need a book on personal finance," he said one day, even though all of Wall Street knew he was the guy who orchestrated deals that shook the market. Emily laughed out loud, a full, carefree laugh that echoed through the cozy space. It was the first time he'd seen her laugh like that. "Personal finance? Reading novels won't help you there," she said, shaking her head. "Sit down. I'll make you some tea. On the house. Don't worry. I don't charge for tea." They started talking more. About the books on the shelves. About autumn in New York with its sidewalks blanketed in golden leaves. about the little things Nathan had never paid attention to in his busy, calculated life. Emily told stories, how she once spilled coffee on a grumpy customer, how her mom taught her to tie ribbons in her hair when she was a child. Her voice was soft but full of life. Nathan didn't say much. He just sat there, listening. And every story she told felt like a missing piece, filling a gap he hadn't known was there, like a gentle medicine for a tired soul that didn't need explaining. One evening, just before closing time, with the shop bathed in soft golden light, Emily suddenly asked, "Has anyone ever really loved you?" "For who you are. Not for your money?" The question came out of nowhere, like a stone thrown into a still lake, sending ripples deep into him. Nathan looked up, gripping the book on the table, his usual confidence faltering. "I don't need anyone to love me," he said sharply, his voice cold like instinct. But inside, something ached, a kind of hurt he wasn't used to. Sharp, uncomfortable, real. Emily didn't say anything right away. She just looked at him, eyes searching past the surface, like she was trying to find something he'd buried long ago. "That's a shame," she said softly, a hint of sadness in her voice. Then she turned away to clean up, leaving him in a silence that felt heavier than anything money could buy. Nathan sat there, her question echoing in his mind like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. When he stepped out into the Brooklyn night, the autumn wind cut through the air, sharp and cold, but he didn't feel it. What he felt was something else entirely. A quiet pain, like for the first time, he realized he'd been alive without ever really living, just moving through endless days that meant nothing. That night, back in his vast penthouse, Nathan didn't turn the lights on. He sat on the couch, staring out at the city glowing with lights that never went out. But this time, they didn't look beautiful. He thought about Emily's smile when she spoke of her mom, about the warm lights of the bookstore, and about that question. Has anyone ever really loved you? He asked himself, without the money, the success, the name, what was left of him? For the first time, Nathan had no answer. But he knew one thing. He wanted to go back to the bookstore, not to buy another book, but to search for something he'd never had the courage to find. Himself. He started getting used to stopping by the shop at the end of the day, when New York dipped into the quiet haze of sunset. The sky burned orange, touched with the smoky gray of a tired city. Nathan didn't make excuses anymore. He simply showed up, pulled the same squeaky old chair near the counter, and listened to Emily share stories about ordinary life. Stories he'd come to cherish. When she once asked him what he did for a living, he simply said, "I work in finance," with a half smile to deflect further questions. She nodded and didn't press. And he silently thanked her for that, for giving him something so rare in his world, space to breathe. With Emily, he didn't have to be Nathan Brooks, CEO of Brooks Investments, New York's wealthiest under-40 headline magnate. He was just Nathan, the guy who didn't know much about books but showed up anyway. And somehow that felt peaceful. But secrets don't stay hidden forever. And his shattered on a night no one saw coming. Nathan had to attend a major charity gala at the Plaza Hotel, one of Manhattan's most lavish venues. He stood on stage in a sleek black suit that fit him like a glove, cameras flashing non-stop as he announced a $1 million donation to a children's hospital. The crowd erupted in applause. Compliments echoed from every corner of the grand ballroom. Reporters scribbled down his every word for tomorrow's headlines. But Nathan's eyes were hollow, like always. Just another scene in a play he'd performed too many times. He didn't know that, in the back of the room, Emily was standing with a tray of champagne in her hands. Her eyes were wide with shock, her face pale like she'd just seen a ghost, Emily had taken the catering job at the gala to help cover her mother's hospital bills, a part-time gig alongside running the bookstore. She never imagined that the man she'd once made tea for, the one she'd laughed with in a tiny corner of Brooklyn, was Nathan Brooks, a name splashed across glossy magazines and endless tabloid rumors. When he stepped off the stage, their eyes met across the sea of glittering gowns and tuxedos. Nathan saw her, and for the first time that night, his heart skipped, a jolt he couldn't control. But Emily didn't smile. She turned away, placed the tray of drinks down with shaking hands, and walked out with stiff, quick steps, like if she stayed a second longer she'd break. The next day, Nathan returned to the bookstore, his heart as heavy as the gray New York sky above. Emily was behind the counter. She didn't look up when the doorbell chimed. She flipped through a book, her eyes distant and blank. "You found out?" he said hoarsely, standing a few feet from the counter, as if getting closer would only make it worse. Emily stopped flipping the pages and looked up, her eyes rimmed red, but burning with anger. "You think it didn't hurt to be lied to?" she asked, her voice trembling, fingers clenching the book so tightly her knuckles turned white. "You sat here, pretending to be someone you're not, listening to my stories, smiling like it meant something, while the whole time you were this. Was I some kind of distraction to you, Nathan?" He shook his head and stepped forward, his voice quicker than usual. "Number that's not." He stopped. He didn't know how to explain. He wanted to tell her the bookstore was the only place that felt real, that he didn't want her to see him like the rest of the world did. A walking bank account, a symbol of wealth and control. But Emily didn't give him the chance. "I thought you were different," she said, her voice cracking. "I told you about my mom, my dreams, because I thought you actually listened. I thought you cared." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she wiped them away quickly and turned her back to him, like she didn't want him to see her break. "Go, Nathan. I don't need you here." He stood there, searching for words, anything to make her stay, but they stuck in his throat like stone. Finally, he turned and left. The bell rang again behind him, this time like a final note. He stepped out into the Brooklyn night. The cold wind carried the damp scent of last night's rain. And for the first time in his life, Nathan felt the sting of real loss. Not a failed deal, not money, but something he couldn't even name, something that couldn't be bought or fixed. It didn't stop there. By morning, the media exploded like a wildfire. A photo taken at the gala, Nathan staring at Emily across the crowd, had gone viral. Headline after headline screamed, "Billionaire Nathan Brooks and the Mystery Girl, secret romance or PR stunt." Articles dug up everything. Emily's part-time job at a Brooklyn bookstore, her mother's health, and wild speculation about their relationship. Nathan's phone rang non-stop. Mark, his assistant, sounded panicked. The PR team offered a dozen strategies to spin the story. But for once, Nathan didn't want silence. He didn't want to bury this like every other scandal. He didn't want this to be forgotten. That evening, at a hastily called press conference at the Brooks Investments headquarters, Nathan stepped up to the podium. The camera flashes exploded around him, lighting his face, calm but firm. He looked straight at the crowd of reporters. His voice was steady, but it carried a weight no one could ignore. "I'm not good at talking about myself," he began, "and I've never done anything like this before. But I'll say this. I found something real when I got rejected by a girl who didn't care about my bank account. She cared about whether I had a real heart, and I've never had that before. I'm not letting it go." The room fell silent for a beat. Then came the murmurs, the frantic typing, the dozens of lenses zooming in to catch every flicker of emotion. The media called it The confession of the century. Social media exploded. But Nathan didn't care. He didn't say it for the press. He said it for her. For Emily. But Emily didn't come back. The bookstore stayed closed for 3 straight days. When Nathan showed up, the door was locked, a small sign swinging on the handle. Temporarily closed. He stood outside with his hands in his coat pockets, staring through the fogged glass. The shelves inside sat quietly in the dim interior, frozen in place. No warm yellow light. No soft voice drifting through the tiny space. For the first time, the pressure Nathan felt didn't come from stock prices or shareholder demands. It came from a hollow ache inside him, one he didn't know how to fill. He wondered if his mistake was hiding the truth, or letting her into his life without preparing for the consequences. That night, back in his vast, empty penthouse, Nathan didn't turn on the lights. He sat on the couch, holding the worn copy of The Man Who Walked Through Loneliness, the one Emily had given him. His fingers brushed the cover, searching for something, some trace of her. He flipped to the first page again. Loneliness isn't about being alone. It's about not being seen. He closed his eyes and saw her, furious, betrayed. He remembered her laughter as she made tea, the way she spoke about her mother, her dreams. He'd hidden who he was because he was afraid of losing that bookstore version of himself, the version that felt real. But now he'd lost her because of that choice. He asked himself, if I'm not Nathan Brooks, who am I? Could I ever be just a man in a bookstore, drinking tea with a girl who tied ribbons in her hair? Or had he let success shape him for so long that he forgot how to be anyone else? After the press conference, Nathan did something no one expected in his high-powered career. He shut down Brooks Investments for an entire week. The staff panicked. Phones rang non-stop. Rumors swirled. Was he resigning? Selling the company? But he didn't care about the noise. He stood outside the hospital where Emily's mother was being treated, coat collar pulled up to shield his face, watching silently through the frosted glass of the ICU lobby. A nurse walked out and handed him a receipt. The bill had been paid, anonymously, through an unnamed charitable fund. "Someone wanted to help Mrs. Harper," she said, unaware that the man standing there was the one who had quietly covered every cent. Nathan nodded once, his voice low. "That's good." Then he turned and walked into the blur of New York's bustling streets. He didn't want Emily to know, not yet. Not while she still hated him. But Emily wasn't naive. She didn't need anyone to tell her. 2 days later, she got a call from the hospital. When she asked about the payment, she dug deeper and found traces linking the donation to a non-profit fund Brooks Investments had quietly supported years ago. She sat alone in her cramped Brooklyn apartment, the paint peeling from the walls, the medical receipt crumpled in her hand, her thoughts tangled like a knot she couldn't untie. Nathan had done this. She was sure of it. But why? Was it guilt? A way to make up for what he'd done? Or proof he wasn't the hollow man she thought he was? She remembered the look in his eyes at the gala, remembered the words he'd said at that press conference. "I found real happiness when I got rejected by a girl who didn't care about my money." She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe it wasn't just another performance, but the hurt still lingered, a wound that hadn't yet closed. Every time she thought of him, it stung like fresh bruises under her skin. Nathan didn't return to the bookstore. No more awkward excuses. No more quiet nights over tea. Instead, he sent her a letter. Not a cold email, not a short text, but a handwritten note on plain white paper. The handwriting was firm, a little shaky, like he'd hesitated with every word. "Emily, I'm not good at loving. And I'm worse at telling the truth. You've probably figured that out by now. I kept who I was from you because I was scared. Scared that if you knew the truth, I'd lose the only place that ever felt real. That bookstore wasn't just 4 walls. It was the only part of my life that didn't come with cameras, headlines, or fake smiles. It was you. If you see me as a liar, I won't argue. I deserve that. But I'm asking for one chance. Not to buy your forgiveness. Not to fix this with money. Just to show you that what I feel for you is real, even if I'm clumsy with it. Nathan. The letter was short, unadorned. But every word struck Emily's heart with a quiet, aching precision. She read it again and again, her hands trembling as she folded it and placed it gently on the old wooden table in her tiny apartment. She sat there all night, staring out the window as streetlights blinked through the soft drizzle, wrestling with herself. She was afraid of being hurt again, afraid it had all been an illusion. But she couldn't deny it. She missed him. She missed the man who fumbled for excuses to buy books, who lit up when she spoke about her mom, who listened like she was the only voice in the world. The next morning, Emily unlocked the bookstore for the first time in nearly a week. She stood behind the counter, wiping shelves like she always did, but her hands trembled slightly every time she touched the books he used to hold. When the bell above the door chimed, she looked up, and there he was. Nathan stood in the doorway, not in a tailored suit, but in a dark gray sweater and faded jeans, looking strangely ordinary. He could have walked in from just around the block, not from the top of Manhattan's skyline. "I'm not here to buy a book," he said, his voice hoarse, his blue eyes steady. "I'm here for your answer." Emily looked at him. Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. She stepped out from behind the counter, closing the distance until only a few feet remained between them. The small bookstore seemed to shrink around them, pulling them into the quiet space between their words. "You're a pain," she said, her voice shaking as she clutched the hem of her sweater. "You come in, mess everything up, and then act like nothing happened. You think I'm just going to trust you again, after everything?" Nathan didn't answer right away. He just stood there, his eyes full of something raw and unguarded, ready, it seemed, for whatever she might say. "I don't expect you to trust me," he said slowly. His voice was low, but steady. "I've spent 35 years chasing money and power like a machine, not knowing what I actually wanted. Then I met you, and I realized I want to be loved. Not for what I have, for who I am, even if I don't fully know who that is yet. If you don't want to give me a chance, I'll understand. You have every right. But I can't walk away without trying, not out of pride, but because you're worth the risk." Emily said nothing. She looked at him, her breathing slowing, as if weighing every word he'd spoken. She remembered the way he used to listen to her stories, the way he awkwardly held books like he had no idea what to do with them, the sting of finding out who he really was. But now, standing in front of her, wasn't the man from the headlines. This was someone different. Someone stripped of armor, ready to be turned away. She took a deep breath. "If you're going to keep coming back here," she said, her voice calmer now, "you better finish a book before you talk again. I don't deal with half-read people, Nathan." Nathan blinked. Then, slowly, a smile broke across his face. Not the polite, calculated smile of a CEO, but something warm, real. It lit up his face under the bookstore's golden glow. "I promise," he said gently, eyes glinting with something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Hope. Emily didn't smile back, but her gaze softened, just slightly, like a door cracked open. She turned, walked behind the counter, and pulled out The Man Who Walked Through Loneliness, handing it to him again, her movements slow and deliberate. "Read it again," she said. "This time live it. Don't just flip through." He took the book. His fingers brushed over the cover like it meant something now. He looked up, eyes meeting hers, softer than she'd ever seen. Under the bookstore's warm light, they stood there. No tearful embrace, no grand declarations, just a silence filled with meaning. A quiet promise that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Nathan knew. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning of something he never thought he'd deserve. And Emily, in her heart, knew she had just given him, and herself, a chance to heal and to believe again. That night, back in the penthouse, Nathan didn't sit alone in the dark. He turned on the lamp, opened the book Emily had handed him, and began reading, line by line, with a sense of wonder. Outside, New York buzzed, lights forever blazing, sirens echoing in the distance. But for Nathan, the truest light now came from a tiny bookstore in Brooklyn. And the girl with the golden hair who had quietly taught him how to live again, one honest moment at a time.